The ancient throne room of the Kirathi Empire stood empty, its crystalline walls reflecting the dim purple light of a dying star. For 300 years, the magnificent obsidian throne had rejected every potential heir who dared place their blood upon its surface. The throne's rejection was absolute; those found unworthy simply dissolved into ash, their essence absorbed by the alien technology that powered the seat of ultimate authority. Marcus Chen pushed his cleaning cart through the massive archway, humming an old Earth tune as he worked. He had been cleaning the Imperial Palace for 6 months now, ever since humans were grudgingly accepted into the Galactic Council as a servant species. The pay was decent, and Marcus didn't mind the work. After 20 years as a janitor on Earth, mopping alien floors wasn't much different. The throne room was supposed to be empty during his shift. The Kirathi nobility had given up testing potential heirs decades ago, after losing too many of their bloodline to the throne's merciless judgment. But tonight, Marcus noticed something different. The throne was glowing faintly, pulsing with an eerie blue light he'd never seen before. "Probably needs dusting," Marcus muttered, approaching with his specialized cleaning equipment. The Kirathi were particular about their sacred spaces being spotless, even if no one used them anymore. As he climbed the steps to the throne platform, his foot caught on the edge of his bucket. The mop handle swung wildly as he tried to catch his balance, and its sharp edge caught his palm. Blood welled from the cut, and before Marcus could pull back, 3 drops of crimson fell onto the throne's armrest. The reaction was instantaneous. The throne erupted in brilliant white light, energy crackling through the air like lightning. Marcus tried to run, but invisible forces held him in place. The blood on the throne began to glow, spreading across the obsidian surface like living fire. Throughout the palace, alarms screamed. Ancient systems that had been dormant for centuries roared to life. In the Imperial Command Center, shocked Kirathi officers watched their screens in disbelief as every defensive system in the Empire suddenly activated. High Chancellor Vex Ara arrived within minutes, her forearms trembling as she beheld the sight. The human janitor stood frozen before the throne, surrounded by a corona of pure energy. But he wasn't dissolving. He wasn't dying. The throne was accepting him. "Impossible," she whispered. "No non-Kirathi has ever. The genetic locks should prevent." The throne's energy began to speak, not in words but in pure knowledge transmitted directly to every mind in the palace. It told of the Kirathi's origins, of how they had not evolved on their homeworld, but had been created by an ancient race. And that ancient race, the true builders of the throne, shared a common ancestor with an insignificant species from a small blue planet in a distant spiral arm. Humans. Marcus felt the knowledge flooding his mind. The throne wasn't just a seat of power, it was a key to technology so advanced it could reshape civilizations, command fleets with thought alone, and unlock the secrets of the universe itself. And it had been waiting for someone with the right genetic markers, not pure Kirathi blood, but the original bloodline of its creators. "Get him off there!" General Kraxtor roared, charging forward with his elite guards. But the moment they crossed the threshold of the throne's light, they froze. The throne's defenses were absolute. Marcus's mind expanded as the throne fed him centuries of knowledge. He saw the Kirathi Empire's true history, how they had found the throne on a dead world and built their entire civilization around it, never knowing they were merely caretakers. He saw the throne's true purpose: to wait for the return of its maker's descendants. "I don't want this," Marcus gasped, fighting against the flow of information. "I just wanted to clean the floor." But the throne had waited too long to be denied. Energy surged through Marcus's body, rewriting his DNA, enhancing his mind, preparing him for a role he never asked for. His simple janitor's uniform began to transform, nanomachines within the throne, weaving it into something new, armor that gleamed with the light of stars. Chancellor Vex Ara fell to her knees, recognizing the ancient protocols activating before her eyes. "The awakening," she breathed. The prophecies were true. Across the Empire, on 1,000 worlds, similar thrones that had stood empty for millennia began to pulse with life. They had found their heir at last, not a noble Kirathi warrior, but a human who had spent his life in service to others. Marcus's transformation completed as the throne's energy finally released him. He stood there, no longer quite human, no longer merely a janitor. The throne had made him something new, a bridge between species, a key to unlock technologies that could elevate or destroy entire civilizations. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated with the throne's power. Chancellor Vexara looked up at him with a mixture of awe and fear. "Now, Lord Chen, you must decide the fate of an empire." The greatest irony was not lost on those present. The Kyrathi, who had treated humans as barely worthy of cleaning their floors, now had to acknowledge one as their rightful emperor. The servant had become the master. Not through conquest or politics, but through blood older than their civilization. As news spread through the palace, Marcus stood before the throne he had been cleaning just minutes ago. He thought of Earth, of humanity's struggles to find their place among the stars. He thought of every slight, every dismissal, every moment when aliens had looked at humans as inferior. The throne pulsed behind him, ready to enforce his will across the cosmos. But Marcus had spent too many years cleaning up other people's messes to become a tyrant now. If he was going to rule, he would do it right. Send messages to all worlds. He commanded, surprised by the authority in his own voice. Tell them the throne has chosen. Tell them things are going to change. The Kyrathi nobility exchanged nervous glances. Change was not something their ancient empire embraced easily, but they had no choice now. The throne had spoken, and its word was absolute. In the depths of space, human colonies that had struggled for recognition received the news with stunned disbelief. A janitor from Earth had become the most powerful being in known space. It was impossible, ridiculous, and yet absolutely true. The throne room slowly filled with officials, military leaders, and nobility, all coming to witness the impossible. They found Marcus sitting on the throne that had killed so many, looking remarkably calm for someone whose life had just been turned upside down. "I need to know everything," Marcus said, the throne amplifying his words with subtle power. "Every treaty, every conflict, every injustice. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right." High Chancellor Vexara stepped forward, her four hands clasped in the traditional gesture of servitude. "The Imperial Archives are at your disposal, Lord Chen. But may I ask, what are your intentions?" Marcus looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her step back. Not cruelty or ambition, but something far more dangerous to the established order: compassion mixed with determination. "My intentions?" Marcus smiled, and it was neither kind nor cruel. "I intend to clean house. And this time, I've got the proper tools for the job." The throne pulsed its approval, and across the empire, the old order began to tremble. The janitor had picked up his mop, and the universe would never be the same. The first week of Emperor Marcus Chen's reign was unlike anything the Kyrathi Empire had experienced in its 1,000-year history. While previous emperors had spent months in ceremonial preparations and political maneuvering, Marcus went straight to work, quite literally. He arrived at the Imperial Command Center at 0500 hours, still wearing a modified version of his janitor's uniform beneath the ceremonial robes. The night shift officers nearly choked on their stimulant drinks when the new emperor walked in carrying a thermal flask of Earth coffee and a data pad covered in handwritten notes. "Show me the waste management systems," Marcus ordered, settling into a chair at the tactical display. Excuse me, Your Majesty?" Commander Thylas blinked all 6 of her eyes in confusion. "Waste management, recycling, energy efficiency ratings for all core worlds." Marcus took a sip of his coffee. "I want to know how this empire actually runs, not just how it fights." The officers exchanged bewildered looks. In their entire history, no emperor had ever concerned themselves with such mundane matters. But the throne's authority flowed through Marcus's words, and they found themselves compiling reports they'd never thought important before. What Marcus discovered appalled him. The empire was hemorrhaging resources through sheer inefficiency. Entire worlds dumped their waste into space. Energy systems that hadn't been updated in centuries burned through power at rates that would have bankrupted Earth in a week. The bureaucracy was so bloated that some departments existed solely to file reports about other departments filing reports. "This is insane," Marcus muttered, scrolling through the data. "You're running an interstellar empire like it's still the Dark Ages. No wonder you need servant species. You're wasting so much energy on inefficiency that you can't maintain your own infrastructure." High Chancellor Vexera, who had been assigned as his primary advisor, shifted uncomfortably. "These systems have served the Empire for generations, Your Majesty. Change is difficult." "Difficult?" Marcus looked up at her, and the throne's power flickered in his eyes. "You know what's difficult? Scrubbing plasma residue off a ventilation system that hasn't been properly maintained in 50 years. That's difficult. This? He gestured at the reports. "This is just laziness." He stood up, and every being in the command center straightened instinctively. The throne had changed him. But at his core, Marcus was still the man who had spent 20 years making things clean and functional. Now he just had a bigger mess to tackle. "Computer, show me the locations of all human servant populations in the Empire," he commanded. The holographic display lit up with thousands of points across hundreds of worlds. Each point represented human communities working in the lowest rungs of imperial society: janitors, maintenance workers, waste processors, all the jobs the Kirathi considered beneath them. "Send a priority message to all human settlements," Marcus ordered. "Tell them they're getting a promotion. Effective immediately, any human working in infrastructure maintenance is to be given full technical authority in their sector." "Your Majesty," General Kraxtor protested, "you cannot simply elevate an entire servant species." "I'm not elevating them," Marcus interrupted. "I'm recognizing what they already are, the people who actually keep this empire running. You nobles can play your political games and fight your border wars. But without the humans fixing your pipes and cleaning your air filters, you'd all suffocate in your own waste within a month." The general's face darkened. But he couldn't argue with the throne's chosen. More importantly, he couldn't argue with the facts that Marcus had laid bare. The Empire did depend on its servant species for basic maintenance, a fact that the nobility had always ignored. Marcus turned back to the display, his mind working through possibilities. The throne's knowledge gave him access to technologies and systems beyond imagination, but his years of practical experience told him that the best solutions were often the simplest ones. "I want every human maintenance worker in the Empire to report directly to me," he announced. "Not through the bureaucracy. Not through noble houses. Direct reports. They see problems. They tell me. I fix them." The logistics alone would be. Someone started to protest. "The throne can process 1 billion simultaneous data streams," Marcus said, tapping his temple where the connection to the ancient device still hummed. "I think I can handle maintenance reports." What followed was the largest restructuring of imperial infrastructure in recorded history. Within days, reports flooded in from human workers across the Empire. They told of failing life support systems held together with improvised patches, of water recyclers operating at 10% efficiency, of power grids on the verge of collapse. Marcus read every report, and with each one, his determination grew. The Kirathi Empire was like a magnificent mansion, with golden walls and a rotten foundation. It had survived on momentum and the dedication of its servant species, but it was dying from the inside out. He began issuing orders that sent shockwaves through the noble houses. Ancient palaces were stripped of their decorative power sources to repair essential systems on colony worlds. Military budgets were redirected to infrastructure updates. Nobles who protested found their own maintenance systems mysteriously prioritized last in the repair queues. "You're making enemies," Chancellor Vexera warned during one of their morning briefings. "The noble houses are not accustomed to being told their comfort is less important than a waste processing plant on a border world." "Good," Marcus said, signing another order that redirected a fleet of luxury yachts to serve as emergency transport for technical crews. Maybe when their golden toilets stop working, they'll appreciate the people who fix them. But it wasn't just about revenge or teaching the nobles a lesson. As the weeks passed, something remarkable began to happen. The efficiency improvements started paying dividends. Worlds that had been struggling to meet basic energy needs found themselves with surpluses. Clean water became available in settlements that had rationed it for decades. The empire was healing from the ground up. The human workers, elevated to positions of authority, proved remarkably adept at their new roles. They had spent years learning these systems from the inside out, developing workarounds and improvements that the Karathi engineers had never considered. Given the authority to implement their ideas, they transformed entire sectors. On the industrial world of Kairos Prime, a team of human technicians led by Sarah Martinez, who had been cleaning fusion reactors for a decade, redesigned the planet's entire power grid, using modifications she'd developed to make her cleaning work easier. Energy output increased by 300%, while waste dropped to near zero. Similar stories emerged from across the empire. Humans who had been ignored and dismissed were suddenly the most valuable citizens in known space, not because the throne had decreed it, but because they had always been valuable. Marcus had simply made everyone else see it. The throne itself seemed to approve. Each night, when Marcus sat upon it to process the day's reports, it fed him more knowledge. He learned of technologies that could transform worlds, of solutions to problems that had plagued civilizations for millennia. But always, the throne seemed to emphasize one lesson above all. Power meant nothing without the wisdom to use it properly. 3 months into his reign, Marcus called for a general assembly. Representatives from every world, every species in the empire, gathered in the Great Hall. Many came expecting grand pronouncements or new conquests. Instead, they found their emperor dressed in his simple uniform, holding a mop. "This," Marcus said, raising the mop, "is the most powerful weapon in the empire. It represents work, service, and the dignity of maintaining what we build. For too long, this empire has valued conquest over construction, prestige over practicality. That changes now." He set the mop aside and looked out at the assembled masses. Humans stood among them now, not as servants but as equals. The transformation was already visible. The hall itself gleamed with an efficiency that spoke of properly maintained systems and pride in work. "I'm establishing the Imperial Maintenance Corps," Marcus announced. "It will have authority equal to the military, because keeping our worlds livable is just as important as defending them. And yes, it will be led primarily by humans, because they're the ones who know how to do the job." The protests from the noble houses were immediate and vocal. How dare he elevate menial labor to the same status as military service? How dare he suggest that cleaning was as important as conquest? Marcus let them vent, then raised his hand. The throne's power flowed through the gesture, and silence fell like a physical weight. "In the past 3 months," he said quietly, "we've reduced empire-wide energy consumption by 40%, while increasing output by 60%. We've brought clean water to 3 billion beings who were dying of thirst. We've prevented 17 ecological collapses by fixing systems that were days from failure. That's what menial labor accomplished. What have your glorious battles achieved lately?" The silence stretched, and in it, Marcus saw understanding dawn in some faces. Not many, but enough. Change would come slowly to an empire this old. But it would come. As the assembly dispersed, Marcus found himself alone with Chancellor Vexara. The old Kirathi had adapted better than most to the new order. Perhaps because she had always been more pragmatic than her peers. "You're reshaping more than infrastructure," she observed. "You're reshaping how we think about worth itself." Marcus nodded, exhaustion finally showing through his enhanced physiology. "That's the point. The throne chose me for a reason. Not because humans are superior, but because we understand something the empire forgot. Everyone has value. Everyone contributes. The greatest palace means nothing if the sewers don't work." He walked to the window, looking out at the capital city. Already, it looked different. Cleaner, brighter, more alive. Human crews worked alongside Kirathi engineers, sharing knowledge that had been hoarded on both sides. It wasn't perfect, there was still resentment, still resistance. But it was a beginning. "What will you do about the military?" Vexara asked. General Kraxtor grows restless. Warriors without wars often cause problems. Marcus smiled. Oh, I have plans for them too. There are dead worlds throughout the Empire, destroyed by ancient wars. Who says the military can only destroy? Let them learn to build. Let them terraform. Let them create instead of conquer. The Chancellor's eyes widened. Using the military for construction was unprecedented. But then, everything about Marcus's reign was unprecedented. As night fell, Marcus made his way back to the throne room. He still cleaned it himself. Every evening. It kept him grounded. Reminded him of who he was beneath the power. The throne pulsed with warm light as he approached, welcoming its chosen. You picked a janitor, Marcus murmured, running his hand along the ancient stone. I hope you knew what you were doing. The throne's response was wordless, but clear. It had known exactly what it was doing. The Empire didn't need another conqueror. It needed someone who understood that true power lay not in commanding others, but in serving the greater good. It needed someone who saw value where others saw only menial tasks. It needed a janitor who could clean up the mess of centuries. The crisis came, as Marcus had always known it would, from the edges of the Empire. But it wasn't a military invasion or a political rebellion. It was something far more dangerous to the established order. It was hope. The message arrived through the throne's network, a priority signal from a border world called Nexus 7. Marcus was reviewing water purification reports when the throne pulled his consciousness into its vast communication array, showing him what was happening in real time. Nexus 7 was a mining world, populated primarily by Thraxians, a silicon-based species that had been conquered by the Kyrathi 3 centuries ago. Like many subject worlds, it was kept productive through careful neglect. The Kyrathi took what they needed and ignored everything else, including the fact that the planet's core mining operations were slowly poisoning the atmosphere. But now the Thraxians had heard about the changes in the Empire. They'd heard about humans rising from servants to authority. They'd heard about infrastructure being repaired, about worlds being healed instead of exploited, and they had decided to ask for something unprecedented help. Show me everything, Marcus commanded, and the throne complied. The situation was worse than he'd imagined. The mining operations had been bleeding toxic gases into the atmosphere for decades. The Kyrathi overseers had known, but deemed it economically unfeasible to fix. In another generation, maybe 2, the planet would be uninhabitable. The Thraxians would die, and the Kyrathi would simply move their operations elsewhere. Your Majesty, General Kraxtor's voice cut through the throne's data stream. I've been informed you're reviewing the Nexus 7 situation. I must advise against intervention. The mining quotas from that world are crucial to our military shipbuilding programs. Marcus opened his eyes, finding the general standing in the throne room with a contingent of military advisors. They looked concerned, not about the dying world, but about their supply chains. How long have you known about the atmospheric poisoning? Marcus asked quietly. The general's mandibles clicked dismissively. The Thraxians have a lifespan of 300 years. The degradation won't be critical for at least 70. It's not an immediate concern. Not an immediate concern. Marcus stood from the throne, and the ancient device's power rippled through the room. An entire species is being slowly murdered for profit, and it's not an immediate concern? They're Thraxians, one of the advisors said, as if that explained everything. Their sacrifice serves the greater good of the Empire. Marcus felt something cold and dangerous rise within him. Not the throne's power, but his own anger, the rage of every person who had ever been deemed expendable. Every life written off as an acceptable loss for someone else's gain. Computer, he said, his voice deadly calm. Display the home worlds of everyone in this room. The holographic display lit up with a dozen beautiful worlds, pristine, protected, their environments carefully maintained for the comfort of the Kyrathi elite. Now show me the environmental status of those worlds versus the subject worlds. The contrast was damning. Every Kyrathi world glowed green with health. The subject worlds were a spectrum of yellow to red, each representing different levels of exploitation and neglect. You've built your paradise on the graves of entire civilizations, Marcus said. And you stand there and tell me it's for the greater good? The strong rule the weak, General Kraxtor stated flatly. It has always been thus. The throne chose you, human. But it did not change the nature of the universe. No, Marcus agreed. It didn't change the nature of the universe. It gave me the power to change it myself. He strode past them to the communication console, activating a empire-wide broadcast. Every screen, every neural link, every communication device in Kirathi space came alive with his image. Citizens of the Empire, Marcus began. I speak to you now, not as your emperor, but as someone who understands what it means to be overlooked, undervalued, and expendable. For too long, this empire has operated on the principle that some lives matter more than others, that some species deserve clean air, while others choke on poison. That ends now. He brought up the data from Nexus 7, displaying it for all to see. The dying world rotated slowly, its atmosphere visibly tainted even from orbit. This is Nexus 7. In 70 years, maybe less, every Thraxian on this world will be dead because we poisoned their air for profit. This is not strength. This is not civilization. This is murder in slow motion. The throne room erupted as advisors tried to cut the feed. But the throne systems were beyond their reach. Marcus continued, his words reaching every corner of the Empire. I'm mobilizing the Imperial Maintenance Corps and the military engineering divisions. We're going to fix Nexus 7. We're going to clean their air, repair their world, and we're going to do it right. And then we're going to do the same for every world suffering under our neglect. He turned to face the camera directly, knowing that billions of beings were watching humans, Kirathi, Thraxians, and dozens of other species. Some of you will say this is impossible, that the resources don't exist, that the Empire can't afford compassion. But I've spent 3 months showing you that efficiency pays for itself, that treating people with dignity makes them more productive than fear ever could. Now I'm going to prove that saving lives is more profitable than destroying them. The broadcast ended, and Marcus turned back to find the throne room in chaos. Half the military staff was shouting about resource allocation, while others were desperately trying to contact their noble patrons. General Kraxtor stood rigid, his forearms clenched in fury. You've doomed us all. The general snarled. Every subject species will demand the same treatment. The Empire will bankrupt itself, trying to save worthless lives. Then maybe the Empire deserves to be bankrupt, Marcus shot back. But I don't think it will come to that. You want to know why? He walked back to the throne, placing his hand on its ancient surface. The device responded, showing them all something that made their protests die in their throats: projected efficiency ratings, resource allocations, and productivity measurements from the past 3 months. Every world where we've improved conditions has increased its output by an average of 200%, Marcus explained. Every species we've treated as equals, instead of servants, has contributed innovations that paid for their elevation 10 times over. Turns out, people work better when they're not dying. Chancellor Vexara stepped forward from the crowd, her aged face thoughtful. The noble houses will rebel. They'll see this as an attack on their privilege. Let them, Marcus said simply. They can adapt or be replaced. The throne recognizes merit, not bloodline. If they can't contribute to a better empire, then they're the ones who are expendable. The word hung in the air, expendable. The same word that had been applied to humans, to Thraxians, to countless species deemed lesser. Now it was being turned on those who had wielded it like a weapon. Over the following days, the Empire split into factions. Progressive elements, especially among the younger Kirathi and the subject species, rallied to Marcus's vision. They formed volunteer corps, donated resources, and shared technical knowledge that had been hoarded for generations. The old guard resisted, of course. Several noble houses withdrew their resources from imperial projects. A few systems declared independence rather than submit to what they called the Janitor's madness. But Marcus had learned something important in his years of service. Most beings, regardless of species, just wanted to live good lives. They wanted clean air, safe homes, and the chance to see their children grow up healthy. When given the choice between supporting those who offered that and those who demanded sacrifice for abstract glory, the choice was clear. The mission to Nexus 7 became a symbol of the new order. Marcus led it personally, bringing together the largest combined fleet in Imperial history. But instead of warships, it was construction vessels, atmospheric processors, and medical frigates. Humans and Kyrathi worked side by side with Thraxians and a dozen other species. When they arrived at Nexus 7, Marcus didn't stay on his flagship. He took a shuttle to the surface, to the worst affected mining settlement. The air was so toxic that even his enhanced physiology required a breathing mask. The Thraxian miners stared in shock as their emperor, the supreme ruler of their conquerors, picked up a plasma cutter and went to work alongside them. The throne's knowledge guided his hands as he helped install the first atmospheric scrubber. But it was his years of manual labor that made the work smooth and efficient. "Why?" asked Grex, an elderly Thraxian whose crystalline skin had been dulled by decades of toxic exposure. "Why do you care about us?" "Why?" Marcus paused in his work, looking at the being who had every reason to hate him and everything he represented. "Because someone should have cared a long time ago. I can't fix the past, but I can damn sure fix the future." Word of the Emperor, working in the mines, spread across the Empire at light speed. Holographic captures of Marcus, covered in industrial grime, installing life-saving equipment with his own hands, became the most shared images in Imperial history. The impact was seismic. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had accepted their fate as expendable suddenly realized they didn't have to. Protests turned into organization. Demands for basic rights became movements for systemic change. And at the center of it all was the example of a human janitor who had refused to accept that some lives mattered less than others. General Kraxtor arrived on Nexus 7 on the third day, leading a fleet of military vessels. For a moment, everyone held their breath, wondering if this was the coup everyone had been expecting. Instead, the general's ships deployed their own construction equipment. Kraxtor himself, the supreme military commander of the Kyrathi Empire, reported to Marcus for work assignment. "The military serves the Empire," the general said stiffly. "If the Emperor says we build instead of destroy, then we build." It wasn't enthusiastic support, but it was support nonetheless. And as the days passed, even the most hardened military officers found something satisfying in construction. They were still using their strategic skills, their logistical expertise, their ability to coordinate massive operations. They were just creating, instead of destroying. The transformation of Nexus 7 took 6 months. By the end, the planet's atmosphere was cleaner than it had been in centuries. The mining operations had been redesigned to be sustainable. The Thraxian population had access to medical care, education, and for the first time in 300 years, hope. The economic impact was even more stunning. The improved conditions and equipment increased mining efficiency by 400%. The Thraxians, no longer slowly dying, contributed innovations that revolutionized extraction techniques. The planet went from a dying asset to one of the most productive worlds in the Empire. "You were right," Chancellor Vexara admitted during the ceremony marking the project's completion. "Treating beings with dignity is more profitable than exploitation." "It was never about profit," Marcus replied, "watching Thraxian children play in air they could actually breathe. That's just a bonus. It was about doing what's right." The success of Nexus 7 sparked a revolution in Imperial policy. World after world requested assistance, and Marcus mobilized resources on a scale never before seen. The Imperial Maintenance Corps grew from a radical idea to the largest organization in known space. The military, reimagined as a force for construction, found new purpose in terraforming dead worlds and repairing the damage of ancient wars. But perhaps the most profound change was in how the Empire saw itself. The old narrative of strength through dominance gave way to strength through unity. Species that had been enemies for centuries found common ground in building a better future. There were still holdouts, of course. Some noble houses retreated to their fortress worlds, clinging to the old ways. Some systems remained locked in ancient prejudices, but they were increasingly isolated, islands of the past in an ocean of change. 1 year after the transformation of Nexus 7, Marcus stood once again before the throne. He was different now. The crown's power had fully integrated with his being. making him something beyond human or Kirathi. But at his core, he was still the janitor who had seen a mess and decided to clean it up. "Status report," he requested, and the throne filled his mind with data. Across the empire, infant mortality had dropped by 70%. Life expectancy had increased on every non-Kirathi world. Education was spreading like wildfire. Innovation was exploding as beings who had never been allowed to think suddenly had the freedom to dream. There were problems, of course. Massive societal change always brought challenges, but they were the problems of growth, not decay. The empire was no longer dying from the inside out, it was being reborn. A chime announced a visitor, and Marcus turned to find a small delegation waiting for him. They were representatives from the Galactic Council, the same body that had once declared humans fit only for servitude. Emperor Chen, the lead ambassador, a ethereal Zelani, spoke carefully. "The Council has been observing the changes in the Kirathi Empire. We are impressed." Marcus almost laughed. A year ago, these beings wouldn't have acknowledged his existence. Now they came as supplicants. "What do you want?" he asked directly. "To learn," the ambassador admitted. "Our own territories face similar challenges. Species deemed lesser, worlds exploited for resources, systems that benefit the few at the expense of the many. We wondered if your methods could be adapted." Marcus felt the throne pulse with something like satisfaction. The revolution he had started was spreading beyond the empire's borders. The idea that every being had worth, that efficiency came through dignity rather than oppression, was too powerful to be contained. "I'll do you one better," Marcus said. "I'll send teachers. Humans who've spent their lives maintaining the systems you've ignored. They'll show you how to fix your infrastructure and your societies. But there's a price." The ambassadors leaned forward eagerly. "Name it." "You acknowledge that no species is inherently servant or master. You commit to judging beings by their actions, not their origins. And you start by promoting every maintenance worker in your territories to positions of real authority." The ambassadors exchanged uncertain glances. It was a radical demand. One that would overturn millennia of established order. "The alternative," Marcus continued, "is to watch your civilizations slowly collapse, as ours nearly did. The choice is yours." They would agree, Marcus knew. Not because they believed in equality, but because they feared irrelevance. But motivations didn't matter as much as results. Once the changes began, they would take on a life of their own. As the delegation departed, Marcus returned to the throne. There was still so much work to do. Worlds to heal, species to unite, systems to reform, but for the first time in the Empire's history, the future looked brighter than the past. He thought of Earth, of the small apartment he'd left behind, of the mop bucket that had started it all. He had come so far from that simple janitor who just wanted to do his job well, but in the ways that mattered, he hadn't changed at all. He was still cleaning up messes, still fixing what was broken, still proving that the most important work was often the work that others dismissed as beneath them. The throne pulsed with warm approval. And across the empire, beings of 100 species looked up at stars that no longer seemed quite so cold. The janitor had become an emperor. But more importantly, he had reminded an entire civilization that every job, every person, every life had dignity. And that, more than any throne or crown or power, was what would transform the universe.